circling back to Baldur's Gate 3, there's been some drama, accusations of drama with this game. And it seems to be that there are some developers in the gaming space that are preemptively, before this game even officially launches, saying that gamers should not get their expectations too high for big RPGs moving forward. Basically trying to say that Larian is the rock star of the RPG space. They are not the Ubisoft. They are not a mainstream developer that can pump these things out quickly or regularly. This Baldur's Gate 3 game is very much an exception to the rule in the industry. And why that is drama is because we'll talk about this more as we go through this, but it kind of, to me, is baffling to preemptively do this, because like, if a studio comes along, releases a game and raises the bar, you would think that just raises the bar and then everybody works towards that new level, right? Like if a studio comes out and they have, like with Red Dead Redemption 2, seamless gameplay to cutscene transitions, kind of like what Naughty Dog did with Uncharted 4, but this time in an open world game that's as huge as Red Dead 2 is. They come along, they do that. That's the standard. That's what everybody needs to do. And it takes a few years, but eventually everybody gets there. You know, it's not easy, but you can get there. That's where we should be looking, or how we should be looking at this Larian Studios thing with Baldur's Gate 3. It should be looked as an anomaly, an exception to the rule, in that it is so exceptional. It's so good that it's baffling to devs. They're like, I don't know how they pulled this off. But instead of being like, okay, well, that's just what they do, look at it and we got to figure out how we can make this more mainstream for these types of games. But anyway, I'll shut up and we'll look at this. This is a video from Legendary Drops, a creator in this space. And this is a really solid video that he put together on the situation that is going on.
Rough because, well, I wasn't really prepared to make another video this week. However, before I go on vacation, I ended up stumbling upon an article and I absolutely had to talk to you guys about it. The article is basically about how a bunch of developers feel that they shouldn't be held to the same standards as Baldur's Gate 3 is setting. A lot of people are seeing Baldur's Gate 3 for the first time. They're watching the videos, or some of them actually got to have some hands-on gameplay, and they're sitting there going, man, this is a huge step forward for RPGs and etc., but there's some people that don't want to be held to the same standard that Baldur's Gate 3 is setting right now. And for the smaller developers that hop in on this conversation, I think they're absolutely valid with what they're bringing up. However, things get really interesting when AAA developers also feel like they need to chime in as well. This article comes from Game World Observer. The article is titled, Why Devs Consider Baldur's Gate 3 Anomaly. Not new...
It's Rockstar level nonsense for scope. Basically, the game is too big for you to hold us to the same standard. And like part of this, I think it depends on the language that we use. Like you can phrase it as developers don't want to be held to the same standard. You could also say developers want you to keep expectations in check. I think both are technically accurate based on how they're phrasing things and how they're saying stuff. One sounds better to the ear than the other. You know, devs are just trying to be honest. Listen, this game is very, very crazy in how much stuff is going on, but that's because that's their specific goal. Like they're not pouring tons of money into like the over-the-shoulder graphics and animation sets. They're not trying to do that type of thing. Instead, it's a top-down isometric view, and then they cut to these cutscenes that are very cinematic after that. But there's stuff that they're doing that's phenomenal, but then they also made sacrifices in other departments to achieve that. One of them being that this game has been in development for years and years with like 400 people across a handful of studios, and it's also been in early access for ages. I know a lot of people thought that they already played this game. I saw some people on Twitter that were like, I thought this game already released. Why is everybody talking about it? It's because what already released was early access. And that was apparently only a quarter of the game. And as we were talking about earlier, I thought it was like a lot more than a quarter of the game was what was in early access. I thought it was like basically the whole game except the endings. So maybe like the first 2 or 3 acts of a 3 to 4 act story. But no. The early access has only been about a quarter of what this game has in total. And we just looked at earlier in the stream a segment from an interview that was done with Fextra Life and the narrative director of the ending of Baldur's Gate 3. And she said that with everything considered, there's about 17,000 endings in Baldur's Gate 3. That's the scope we're talking about. It's madness. It really is.
Standard for the RPG genre. It's Rockstar level nonsense for scope. The article reads, what sparked the debate for Baldur's Gate 3? This all started with a Twitter thread by strange scaffold head Xalavier Nelson Jr. I'm glad I said that right this time. The studio head is best known for Space Warlord Organ Trading Simulator and the upcoming Max Payne shooter El Paso Elsewhere. He cited several things that separate Baldur's Gate 3 from most RPGs in the market, namely long development cycle that started back in 2017, 2 previous games, Divinity Original Sin 2 and Divinity Original Sin, worth of tech and institutional knowledge to draw from, successful early access period lasting 3 years that provided Larian with community feedback, bug hunting, and cash flow, a huge team of over 400 developers across 7 studios, the license for one of the largest entertainment IPs out there in
D&D. So if we take these one by one, long development cycle that started in 2017, that's pretty standard for modern games, modern AAA games. I think the common thread here is that a lot of this will be like, well, but that's normal. It's normal for AAA game development. But the key here is that RPGs, especially of this type, are still considered very niche. They just don't sell anywhere near as well as big open world adventure games. They just don't. And so typically you don't see a game that's expecting lower sales with this level of development, with 400 people across 7 offices, with 6 years of development. You just don't typically see that because these games don't turn that big of a profit to warrant that crazy of an investment, So I think that that's going to be the common thread here, is that this one dev is like, listen, these games are usually made by smaller studios and we can't do this. It's like asking a team of 50 people to put something together on par with GTA 5. And then they're like, we can't. It's not a matter of try harder or shoot for the stars, kid. It's like, no, we can't. There are not enough human beings working on this project to make that happen. So I think that's going to be the thing that comes up time and time again with this.
Dungeons and Dragons. Reading directly from Nelson's tweet, like a lot of people, I'm deeply excited for the lovely folks at Larian and what they've accomplished with Baldur's Gate 3, but I want to gently, preemptively push back against players taking that excitement and using it to apply criticism or raise standard to RPGs going forward. This is not a new baseline for RPGs. This is an anomaly. Adding that, trying to reach the same bar without the same experiences or advantages could kill an entire group of studios. Adding on to that, Rebecca Harwick from Grimoire Games added, this whole thread, you can't be appalled by how much big games cost to make, and those lavish productions, the standard by which all these games are judged. I hope Baldur...
Yeah, you can't be appalled about how much big games cost to make and make those lavish productions the standard by which all games are judged. Yeah, well, and this is the sort of interesting conflict between people being frustrated that games are taking 5-6 years to make, cost $200 million, so they have to launch at $70, have collector's editions and the Ultimate Edition, and then the Ultimate Premium Deluxe Plus Pro Max Edition as well. People are frustrated by all of that, but then they also expect crazy high levels of production value, and it's just not that easy to do that. So I can understand the frustration there on Rebecca's part for sure. But again, I guess it's tied up in the language. Like talking about how it's not a raised standard. This isn't the new standard, but rather it's just a really exceptional game. I can understand that. And I think, again, it only makes sense if you twist it specifically with the perspective that this is coming from somebody working on smaller studios, smaller teams in a more niche area of the industry. Who knows how well Baldur's Gate 3 will sell? If it sells gangbusters, maybe we'll see more AAA approached or AAA budget games like this. Time will tell. But the reason you don't see a lot of crazy high-end AAA games of this scope is because, again, these are just considered much more niche. Devs seem a bit salty, TBH. It kind of comes off that way, whether they mean it or not. It certainly comes off that way. Let's see. Is it going to... I didn't see it. Personally, I somewhat agree. People do have really too high expectations from AAA studios. As long as the game is good and not broken at launch, I can consider playing it. Yes, Amaya, I think expectations are very high for AAA stuff. And part of this got tied up in the $70 price tag that games now have in the AAA space. The understanding or the expectation is if your game costs $70, it's going to be amazing. It's going to be crazy high production value. It's going to earn that price tag all the way. Whereas a lot of these studios are like, well, we need to charge that much to break even if we're not reaching that level of fidelity. So I think there definitely is a little bit of headbutting going on between devs, publishers, and these studios and gamers rather, for sure.
Baldur's Gate 3 is a generous, once-in-a-lifetime RPG. I hope no one expects 10 to 20 to 40-person teams to make one. Now, most of the other developers that hopped in on this tweet also shared similar sentiments. However, they were also smaller third-party companies or indie developers, and we don't have those same kind of expectations for them that we would anybody else. We wouldn't look at them and say, well, you need to make games that look and play just like Baldur's Gate 3. That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We don't look at a game like Vampire Survivors and expect those guys to turn around and come out with the next Halo or something like that. If anything, we actually expect from those smaller companies to produce less polished games to us that just have more in-depth gameplay or explore a very specific part of gameplay in a much larger scope than most games normally do.
And to be clear, when people in the community expect AAA quality from AA teams, we make fun of them because that is stupid. And that is my commitment to all of you, that if you guys do that, I'll make fun of you. And if I do it, I expect you to make fun of me. Fair is fair.
And have really simplified game loops that keep us hooked and keep us addicted, like a Vampire Survivors or something like that. Now, what's really interesting about this thread is that, well, it doesn't just end with the third party and the indie developers. No. The AAA developers felt like they should also chime in as well. And oh boy. Insomniac Games design manager Ryan McCabe urged others not to use a singular game to set expectations for everyone that's developing RPGs because it isn't useful and instead foolhardy. Obsidian Entertainment design director Josh Sawyer noted that having the foundation set and the funding to build things on your own terms is invaluable. This is not downplaying the talented work on Baldur's Gate 3, but acknowledging the case is atypical for the games industry.
Certainly, like, this is a game that they wanted to make, that they've been working on for 6 years, and their community is very excited because this is exactly the game the community wanted them to make. So it's kind of a match made in heaven where it seems like a win-win for everybody, right? And that's certainly rare because usually for these studios to make games like this, they have to go and find a publisher that's going to demand they do X, Y, and Z, which is less than ideal. However, with that said, does it not come off as really weird that all of these people are coming out in full force to talk about this? Like, who cares what one of the heads of Insomniac has to say about the development of an RPG like this? Like, who gives a crap? He works with Insomniac. Yeah, I'm sure he's a phenomenal game designer and he's earned his position in the industry. But like, why are all of these people talking about this? It's just really weird. Are they that threatened by it? Larian is actually a pretty big studio, even though they're in a niche segment. The reason why they're this big and this accomplished and respected is because they're small, or they're in a niche area of the industry, but they put out phenomenal stuff. It's just really weird. They're scared of being held to the standards of people who are passionate about what they do. I mean, maybe I just think actually the way you phrase that, I think it might actually be correct, because it's, having the foundation set and the funding to build things on your own terms is invaluable. The conditions under which Baldur's Gate 3 was made are atypical. This is in no way a slight against the game or the people working on it, who are clearly passionate and talented. Obsidian Entertainment designer director. Oh no, that's what I just read. Yeah, Insomniac Games design manager Ryan McCabe urged others not to use a singular game to set expectation for everyone developing RPGs because it isn't useful and instead foolhardy. Again, it seems weird to me that these people are commenting on this. Like, it's just odd. Josh Sawyer is known for being extremely passionate about his games. Well, Josh is also in a position where Insomniac has proven themselves, and so at this point, I think whatever they're working on within reason, Sony's going to support them and give them the check to do it. But it is true that in the games industry, you are trying to please people in suits very high up in the company who make those budgeting decisions, and they don't usually play video games. They don't really know the ins and outs of what will make it good, what will make it bad. They just know the business side of it. And so you have to convince them that this game is going to be really good or worth playing or this or that. And a game like this where you're pitching it, it takes 6 years to make, and it's going into a very niche area of the industry. I can understand why not a lot of these people find that, or the business managers make it, or find it compelling in that same way. Sawyer's the one with Obsidian, not Insomniac. Oh, okay. Still, Obsidian now under Xbox has been given a wide berth to do what they want to do. We still don't know a lot of what they're working on. There's a lot of hush stuff in the works, but it's true. They're under the corporate thumb of Xbox, but Xbox is supporting them and giving them the money to do what they think is going to be successful. Pentiment is a great example within Obsidian. Pentiment doesn't make any damn sense to release or make. Like, nothing about that game makes sense from a studio of that size to spend years working on, but they did it.
Now, I find these tweets specifically a little bit more interesting. I don't know if this is industry transparency. Are they telling us that, some of these larger studios like Insomniac or Obsidian Games don't actually have any autonomy over the things that they're creating? Or are they telling us that they don't get the amount of funding that they need for some of the projects that they're making? Or are they saying that they do? It's interesting to say that they're jumping in on this conversation and saying that they also don't want to be held to the standard that Baldur's Gate 3 is putting out, when they themselves come from companies that have more than enough resources to be able to put out the exact same quality of games as Larian Studios does. Just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Now, things get really interesting when
I'm trying to look at this as fairly as I can, but it does seem like they're just don't hold all RPGs to the standard set forth by Baldur's Gate 3. Okay. Whatever. But I think for gamers to now expect, if you're going to make an RPG, you have branching consequence and things like that, commensurate and proportionate to what the budget and scope is, I think that's fair. As long as the gaming community looks at it and is like, hey, if you're a AAA company and you're making an RPG, yeah, we're going to hold you to the standard of Baldur's Gate 3. I think that's fair. But if they look at a AA studio and they're like, okay, well, yeah, obviously you can't accomplish what's in Baldur's Gate 3, but if you aim for that, that's good. I'm sure this is probably all just a lot of nonsense. Probably not even it's a lot of nothing. That's why I put drama in quotation marks. There's games professionals that are acting like this is a big deal, but I think we all technically agree at the end of the day. Yeah, AA studios shouldn't be expected to make the same stuff as big AAA studios. No duh. I don't what are we talking about? What's the disagreement?
When Diablo 4 senior designer Chris Balzer also drops in. He says, "You're absolutely right. Even if you look at one of Vink's touchstones, Ultima 7, that's a game that had 12 years of prior games feeding into it. If we were to look at this as a new benchmark, we would need to then focus on creating conditions just like with Tears of the Kingdom." Furthermore, he states, "But people often only look at the fruits of labor and not the labor itself. Same as it ever was, I guess. Same deal with people wondering why there are so few artists painting like Renaissance masters." And now this is where I'm saying to pump the brakes. It's completely fine for some of these smaller companies to hop in, some of these smaller developers to hop in and say, hey, don't hold us to these kind of standards, even though I think it's weird that they even bring it up because I can't imagine people actually doing that to them. But it's a completely different thing.
Yeah, this whole argument or discussion kind of shifts when you realize that this is mostly happening on Twitter. And so it's a lot of people who are talking about something even though nothing needed to be talked about. It's like, hey, we agree. And they're like, okay, but I just wanted to say. It's like, you don't need to. We agree. Okay, I hear you, but I just wanted to say. It's like, shut up. There's no disagreement. We agree you shouldn't hold AA studios to the same standards as AAA studios. But like in the same way that you're going to hold, and it's why it's funny Obsidian and Insomniac guys are doing this, because they've been doing this to themselves in different ways, where we've been saying like, it's not fair to let some companies off with having, like, for example, slow load times, when we've seen what Insomniac can do with Spider-Man with the SSD on the PS5. It's insane. Like, clearly it's possible. If you're a AAA game developer, you should be able to do something relatively similar to that. Or with Obsidian, we hold Bethesda Game Studios to that standard a lot in the RPG area of their games, partially because they are connected since they worked on New Vegas, which is a Bethesda IP, but like also because they're making semi-similar games and they're in the same general size in terms of studio. And so people compare different studios and games and projects all the time. It happens all the time. And so it's just funny that these people are now like, okay, but like, don't stop it.
Thing. When you have Diablo 4 coming into the picture, we're talking about a company that has far more resources than Larian Studio does, far more people working for them, far more just money, experience, everything, far more everything. If we're going to be running by at least his idea of how things should work, well, then that should be the same case for Diablo 4. And Diablo 4 should show this massive evolution of the series from years of experience and all of the other games that's been feeding into it, whether that's Warcraft, StarCraft, Overwatch, whatever. It doesn't matter. But personally, even though I like Diablo 4, it is definitely not that game. It's not that game that has 20 years of other games that are feeding into it. It's not the game that reflects all of this experience learned from prior Diablo titles.
I would personally disagree. I mean, I think that Diablo 4 is that. It's the reason people are connecting so much to it is because it's very exceptional in that way. So I would probably disagree on this part of the take, but they're just different games. Like Diablo 4 for a lot of people is triumphant, but I think it's triumphant for some people, and then for other people it's really disappointing, and it's simply because Diablo 4 is trying to do something very different. What like Baldur's Gate 3 is trying to do is it's trying to be the best like definitive RPG in this space for a very niche group of players, whereas Diablo 4 was trying to be like very accessible, open itself to a new audience, first time players, that type of thing. So I think they both are succeeding, as far as I can tell, in their goals, and I think that that's what you have to compare these two at, because they're just trying to do different things. Diablo 4 is very safe. Yeah, I agree. But again, you have to ask what they were trying to do. It was safe, and they put a lot of work into making it more accessible and also much more social. They wanted to really lean into like the MMO aspects of the game, which clearly they did. And a lot of people have found a lot of fun with that. But it's because they were trying to get new people to play the game and expand it to many, many more millions of players beyond what they've done before. Real quick, Magnus fit check. Come on, focus camera. Focus on my hand. Are you going to focus? Focus. No, it's not going to focus. This camera is a trooper. There we go. And then we swap. He's coming together slowly but surely. Those are his horn titas, but he's coming together. Okay, back to it.
Now, like I said before, it is completely fine for some of these other companies to hop in and have their opinion and say, don't hold us to this standard. It's a completely other thing for these AAA companies to come in and try to use this as an excuse. No, because Larian did set the bar. They set the bar for you. AAA games should absolutely be aiming to hit the same mark that Larian Studios does. There's absolutely no excuse for it, especially with the size of some of these companies and how much money they have available to them, how many people they have that are working for them, how long-standing some of their franchises are. There are no excuses whatsoever for them not to be able to compete with games like Baldur's Gate 3 in terms of scope, in terms of depth.
I agree. It is always a little baffling to me when you look at some of these games and you see that they're made by like 3,000 people, and then you see another game like BattleBit and it's made by like a handful or like one guy or three guys or whatever. And you're like, okay, well, how does that work? Like, they're different games and scope is a little different, but one of them is like shockingly amazing for being made by a small studio and team. And then other people or other games, it's like, okay, thousands of people worked on this and it barely holds together. Like, that's what I'm always blown away at with Call of Duty. Like, so you do annual releases, thousands of people are working on these games and they still are broken every single time they launch. Like, what are they doing all day? Like, I saw a TikTok of Asmongold talking about this same situation, and he had a good point. He was like, look at Twitter. Elon Musk fired 80% of the Twitter workforce, and the website still operates just fine. No noticeable issues. In fact, they've rolled out more features quicker, including offering paid like partnerships to Twitter creators, something that Twitter never did before that. And they've done all of this in the span of just like a handful of months. There were like a couple of technical hiccups here and there, but they got rid of 80% of their workforce. You would think that would at least significantly impact the performance of the site. They've had trouble with ads and stuff getting those signed, but I'd say that's more because of Elon's habits of talking too much. So kind of a separate issue. But maybe the question with all of this is just that, like Asmongold said, maybe there's time, or maybe this is the time for reevaluation of where the money's being spent. Maybe these games that are being made by 1, 2, 3, 4,000 people, maybe they could be made by smaller teams that are more focused, that have better management, less middle managers clogging up progress. Because that's the big thing. Big companies move slow. They're very inagile. They can make big, powerful things happen, but they move slow. It's like an elephant, or like any one of these video games with like the big boss that's massive and is a colossus. And when he slams his fist down, you see the fist go all the way up, but it takes like 3 seconds to come down because he's big and bulky and moves slow. So you have time to get out of the way. That's what these big companies are. And maybe they shouldn't be like that. Maybe they should lose some weight, get a little more nimble, and they could do more stuff better. Like, I really think that there is a lot of corporate bloat at play with a lot of these companies. It seems pretty clear that many of these companies are clogged up. And like my dad, for example, works with Microsoft. My dad works in Microsoft. He works with them at a separate company, but he was saying that it's like well known that some of these companies will go and hire people just so they can't work at a competitor's office. Microsoft will hire engineers, software engineers, so they don't go work with Apple. Meta will hire software engineers so that they don't go and work at Twitter because they want to retain the talent. They'll just hire them to basically do nothing, so long as they're not working for the competitor. It's baffling, but it works and it happens. I mean, look at Twitter. They lost 80% of their workforce and somehow everything seems fine. So all of this to say, like, maybe this is a point where people should evaluate whether their like the budgets are in check and the scope is in check. And now Meta has Threads. Yeah, but Threads has like completely collapsed already. Like it's actually pretty bad. I've been following it pretty closely because I was wondering if Meta was a worthy investment again. Because if it is, then it's at a very good price right now. The stock is, but I don't think so. I think the whole thing with Threads is interesting, but as far as I can tell, everybody signed up for a Threads account and then deleted the app or has not opened the app again because Threads just isn't really where it needs to be. It seems kind of rushed out. So I don't think Threads is going to be a real competitor to Twitter for a while.
In terms of performance, I mean, you look at Larian right now, and they've already come out and said, we don't care about meeting a specific date. We want to make sure that when we release this game, it's going to play at 60 stable on the PlayStation 5. They're taking their time to make sure that the game comes out for the Xbox and it's in perfect working condition when it does, regardless of whatever hiccups or problems that they've had along the way. This is a company that holds itself to a standard, a quality standard that many developers don't anymore. This isn't a...
But I think the point of these other developers from Insomniac and from Obsidian is that comes from a very special, privileged position in the industry where they have a lot of other games under their belt that have made a good amount of money, and they are able to take their time, whereas a lot of other studios couldn't. Like a lot of other companies, if this studio was like underneath Ubisoft's banner, maybe not Ubisoft because they have a couple of games in development hell right now, but like EA probably would have just forced it out like a year ago or 2 years ago, and it would have launched kind of buggy, not performing super great. But because they're independent and they can do what they want, they can put a game out that's really high quality and polished. So I think I think the community is looking at these comments from these developers and saying, well, this should be the standard for AAA development because this is what we want. This is better. This should be the standard. And other people are saying, or the devs are saying, but they're in a very specific situation. They aren't working for a company that's going to force them to put stuff out before it's ready. And they're both true. They're both true. But I think what the lesson should be with all of this is that it should, in the future, this should be the standard that we demand from those companies. Right now, it's not this way. Right now, companies do rush stuff out, but it shouldn't be that way. We should demand this Larian Studios quality from these big companies like EA, Ubisoft, Activision, all of those companies. We should demand this so that it eventually becomes the standard. And then every studio is able to do what Larian is doing right now. I understand it's not that way right now, but it's going to stay that way unless you demand something different. At some point you have to put your foot down.
Excuse for other developers not to be able to meet that. No. Instead, this is an example that they should be trying to follow in the footsteps of. I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts on this. I, again, wasn't really planning on putting out another video. I'm going on vacation after this. I'll be back. It'll be a couple more weeks before I get any other videos out. But, yeah, I just wanted to give some light to this. I hope...
Show off going on vacation. Good video. Shout out to, once again, the one and only Legendary Drops. I would say, I think at the end of the day, there's not a lot of drama here, despite what some people are saying on Twitter, Threads or whatever. It seems pretty clear that this is a situation where a lot of people agree. I think we're all in the same position. Don't demand AA studios produce something of the same quality as a AAA studio. That's stupid. Everybody agrees with that. That's not scandalous. However, the AAA devs are saying it's important to recognize that Larian is in a very unique and very special position, which they are, and that allows them to do this. But I would say just because they're in that unique position doesn't mean that we should not expect this from other studios. The industry doesn't currently allow for games like this to come along very often, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't expect it or demand it, because how else are you going to ever change that standard, which I think we all want it to change. So that's my position.